As I understand it, there was also a movement, the Biafra movement by many Igbos to secede and become their own um, independent state in Nigeria. Were the Asabas also part of that movement?
Well, that movement had not actually existed prior to the events that we're now discussing. Nigeria was relatively a peaceful country. The ethnic groups were relatively living together side by side peaceably until these tensions that I alluded to. It was only following those tensions and following the general feeling within the Igbo population that they were no longer desired in Nigeria, or they were no longer welcomed in Nigeria, that this feeling that perhaps if they were to go back to their own territory, as it were, in the East, and then sort of that they would be safer if they did that. Now, I think there was some general conversation following the second coup that perhaps there was a better way that Nigeria could be held together to have some kind of loose federation structure. Conversations were held along those lines that perhaps you could have the Eastern region as a federating structure, you could have the Southwest, then you could have the Northern region. In fact, I think historically, the then president of Ghana had actually scheduled a meeting between the then federal government of Nigeria and the chap who eventually became the secessionist leader for Biafra, Ojukwu. There was a meeting in Ghana to see if this federating unit structure could work. I think following some agreements reached there that all parties signed up to, both parties came back to Nigeria, and that agreement, I think General Gowan, who was representing Nigeria at the time, felt unable to continue with what was agreed. And I think it was against that background that Biafra was now declared by Ojukwu, who was essentially the governor, the then military governor of the Eastern region. So the simple answer to the question is essentially that prior to 1966, there was really no sort of great quest for anything called Biafra. I think it was those very sad events and those tragedies that occurred within the country that led practically most Igbo people felt unwelcome with the events that were occurring. When one looks at it, it's actually quite sad because people like me, my dad was actually a Nigerian nationalist. He fought the Brits, he fought for the independence of Nigeria. People like that, had a preference for the wider Nigeria. They were not that very keen to see Nigeria broken up. But in a situation where Igbo people did not feel safe within the country, and their safety could not be guaranteed by the existing governance structure in the country, I think the quest for Biafra became almost inevitable. But it wasn't actually the choice of many people. I think it became just an outcome that people embraced out of a sense of necessity. Well, following the breakup of the rapprochement that was being put together for this federating unit, Ojukwu declared the Republic of Biafra. This was unacceptable to the federal government of Nigeria. So they essentially said, no, you can't do that. And in the context of that, initially it was described as a police action, that the federal government was taking a police action to bring back the Southeast, which had been declared as Biafra, to bring them back into the fold. So of course, both sides did not share the views of each other. And unfortunately, the war started. Now, just as I explained before, you had a lot of Igbos who had left different parts of Nigeria to return to the southeast. Asaba being on the cusp of that southeast, because it's the river Niger that actually creates the distance between Asaba and the southeast. So there's actually a very close proximity between Asaba and the southeast. And as I explained earlier, Asaba people are essentially Igbos. So a lot of people had also come back to Asaba. So a lot of Asaba indigenes resident in other parts of Nigeria had also come back to Asaba. So following declaration of that secession and Nigeria's action to reunify the Southeast, the federal troops were now making their way to Biafra. But I think it's fair to say that prior to that, Biafran soldiers had also tried to make their way to the southwest. They tried to come to Lagos. But it wasn't seen then as an aggressive step because there was some general conversation, apparently, between the southeast, which is Biafra, and the southwest, in that if one succeeded, the other should also succeed. So there was some understanding, it seemed at the time, that what was happening by that incursion to Lagos was not meant to be aggressive. But it's fair to say that in the Southwest, it was considered aggressive. So that incursion had been attempted, and that there was a pushback, and the Biafrans had been pushed back to the Southeast. Now the war proper now started. And the federal troops of the 2nd Division of the Nigerian Army, led by a soldier, highly regarded soldier called Murtala Mohammed. He led the 2nd Division, him and somebody called Lieutenant Colonel Ibrahim Taiwo were now leading the 2nd Division, as it were, to cross over to Biafra to essentially end the succession. Well, they got to, there had been some skirmishes, apparently, even before they got to Asaba. But when they got to Asaba, the records indicated that there was really no aggression from people who were resident from Asaba people. I think there was also a general feeling within a lot of Asaba people that they being on the federal side and they not particularly being interested in Biafra, because there was quite a significant aspect of Asaba population that were not keen on succession. And they felt, well, they're on the federal side, so they had nothing to fear, that the federal troops would protect them as they're making their way across to Biafra. But sadly, they got to Asaba, and the events that occurred there was perhaps not quite what the indigenes and the residents had expected. Now, if you were to ask me what did I think led to that or motivated that level of aggression, there was a general feeling that the chap who killed Sir Ahmadu Bello, Sardauna Sokoto, who was a highly regarded and highly revered northern leader, was also not just a politician. He was the head of the Muslims, as it were. So he held various highly regarded positions. So he was seen as their leader. He was seen as a northern leader at the time. The chap who killed him in the first coup was said to be from Asaba. As it turned out, he's actually from a neighboring town, but Asaba loomed large in those days and was considered to be, most people that came from neighboring towns will normally say they're from Asaba to be able to identify more accurately, more in a way people would understand where they came from. So there was a feeling that the chap who killed Sardauna Sokoto was from Asaba. So there was a sense in which it was being seen as a revenge, that when they get to Asaba, they would essentially teach the town a lesson for what had occurred. So from records that we have, quite a number of us were too young at the time. I feel that there was a sense in which it was said Asaba was relatively peaceful. The Biafrans had receded to the east. The soldiers got into Asaba around the 4th or the 5th of October. They now stayed in Asaba. It was thought perhaps they were preparing how to cross over, because there's a bridge, there's a river, and there's the river Niger on the other side. So on the first day of their arrival, there were some sort of not very friendly sort of altercation between the soldiers and Asaba residents. And the leaders, I think, were you about to ask a question?
On the first day of their arrival, that is October 5th, or is that the night of October 4th?
It appears that they came in late-ish October 4th. But I think their presence was more felt October 5th. And there were not some very healthy exchanges between the soldiers and the residents. But killings had not really started at that point. But the leaders of the town felt that there's probably a need for them to interface with the troops, with the Nigerian troops, give them some confidence that they had nothing to fear from Asaba, that Asaba was actually compliant. Asaba was part and parcel of the federal territory. So following those conversations, I think it was suggested to them that they could all come out to welcome the federal troops on the 7th of October at a place referred to as Ogbosewe Square. So it was arranged that a lot of Asaba people should come out in their numbers to welcome the federal troops at that square as a way of showing loyalty, also perhaps as a way of the federal troops reassuring them publicly that they had nothing to fear. Our understanding of the position is that between that 5th and the 7th of October, it must have been perhaps a little clearer to Asaba indigents that this visit to the square might not actually be quite what it was sold to them as, because there had been a number of other incidents in the town. Soldiers were being really, really, really nasty to the local population. They were going into houses. Sometimes see they're looking for saboteurs, they're looking for Biafran soldiers, and of course, incidents like that always leads to a lot of friction. But what was certainly clear was that on the day of that massacre, which was the 7th of October, I think it was organized in such a way that Asaba has 5 villages, and this Ogbosewe is one of the villages. So people were now being essentially led from the various villages to this particular square where they were meant to assemble. And on the way of this rather sad journey, people could see that soldiers were going into houses and essentially forcing out people who probably did not want to go to the square. And in some cases, gunshots were being heard. So one can only imagine that the people who were being led to this procession were beginning to get a sense that it wasn't quite a happy occasion that they were going to attend at Ogbosewe Square. Our understanding was that they got to Ogbosewe Square, and the men were separated from the women. The men were all clad in white, as our people, when they're going for ceremonial occasions, all sort of wear white. The men were separated and the women were separated. And machine guns concealed have been sort of hidden on one aspect of the square, facing where the direction where the men were. And orders were given by Lieutenant Colonel Taiwo, who is the deputy to Murtala Mohammed, for the shooting to commence. And of course, sadly, a frightful massacre took place in that on that location.